Hello again, I am Blunty, you are the audience, and this video is about the performance numbers when it comes to three comparable graphics cards targeting 1440p and 4K gaming. The first is, of course, the much anticipated AMD's brand new RDNA 2 blasting big navy boasting RX 6800. Which will be, I think it's safe to predict, the best selling out of the three new 6000 series cards launching right now. Well, technically launching. Just try and buy one, I dare you. In the green corner, its closest current match in Team Green's arsenal, the wildly desirable and popular RTX 3070. And for some generation-to-generation perspective within the same house, I'll also be showing it against the 5700 XT, AMD's now last-gen equivalently positioned card. For my tests, I'll be using a mix of real-world gameplay and games with their own built-in benchmarking modes where available. And I am not about to overload you with minutes on end of charts and bar graphs of dozens of games set over some intolerably tedious dubstep music or some crap like that. I hate videos like that, they are so boring. Instead, I've chosen half a dozen representative and useful examples of popular games, all running on different game engines to get a feel for how this thing behaves. And like I said in the opening, I'll be testing at 4K and 1440p, always at Ultra or Epic or whatever the developer calls its highest possible settings. The only exception is I'll be turning off motion blur where available because motion blur makes me feel physically sick. I'm not being facetious about it, it really does make me feel queasy. The test rig I'm using is also representative of a hardware level an enthusiast PC gamer might be using. I'm running on a high-end, but technically last-gen, Ryzen 9 3900X. All games run from a pretty standard SATA 3 SSD, and I'm running PCIe 3-based motherboard. Technically, the card of course supports PCIe 4.0, but there's a negligible benefit to 4.0 right now with GPUs, and it's absolutely not what most people out there will be using right now anyway. Much more practical to test on PCIe 3.0, in my opinion. Now, all that said and done, let's look at the games. Watch Dogs Legion is up first, running on Ubisoft's own bespoke Disrupt game engine. I used to use Watch Dogs 2 for benchmarks quite a lot because it was a bit of a pig on CPU and GPU, and Legion is no different. It makes for a nice, stressy, benchmarky test. Unfortunately, while the 6800 can and will do ray tracing, in this game I hit some kind of glitch or bug, and despite being able to enable ray tracing in the menus, it didn't actually activate in the game. So a ray tracing on versus off comparison will have to wait until I work that out, I'm afraid. I did report the issue to Team AMD, but they didn't have a solution ready for me by the time I had to prepare this video, so shrug. But, as you've been seeing, at 4K maxed out, Team Red beat Team Green pretty handily here. And although we're still sub 60 FPS, for games like this, I tend to target 45 FPS or more, as the gameplay isn't heavily reliant on high frame rates, but I do appreciate a smooth playback, and about 45 FPS is where I start to hit that mark. But as you can see, we're not far off 60, so it wouldn't take much tweaking to get there from here. At 1440p, we see spikes up to triple digits, but far more common to float just over 60 FPS, and here the cards are pretty evenly matched. It's very likely we're hitting a bottleneck somewhere, but with a 3900X, a 12-core CPU churning away, I doubt it's that. But at the end of the day, I consider that argument irrelevant, because we can cap at 60 for perfect 60 FPS smoothness, and this game won't really benefit, like I said, gameplay-wise, from exceeding that anyway. But we do at least handily beat the 5700 XT, and Big Red's maxed frame rates are noticeably bigger than the Nvidia card, which is interesting. Outer Worlds next, running on old reliable Unreal Engine 4, a game engine which usually has Nvidia with an edge. And this is an interesting case. We more or less double what the 5700 XT can do, and here, as I predicted, Team Green takes the lead, if only slightly. But slightly is enough to get it past 60 FPS, which again, for this game, and the way its combat works, you're not really going to see much benefit of going past, but you do want to hit that, while the 6800 doesn't quite get there. Again, a few settings tweaks here and there will easily get you to 60 locked without sacrificing much, if anything, noticeable. 1440p gets you triple digits though from both current cards, and a useful 70 or so from the XT. Again, for this game, I just lock it to 60 and be done. But for our testing purposes, at least on paper, the numbers still push Team Green ahead of Red by a noticeable amount. Enough to pique my curiosity, in fact, so we'll have another but very, very different Unreal Engine game in a moment. GTA 5, though, long in the tooth now by gaming standards, but still remarkably popular and still worthwhile benchmarking, and running on Rockstar's own in-house Rage game engine, which we'll probably see in their upcoming games. And here, Red wins by a noticeable gap. All three cards can get 4K at 60, or close enough to tweak it to get there without noticeable sacrifice, but the 6800 can find triple-digit numbers, while Nvidia barely scrapes the 90s. Nvidia also saw a few lag spikes here and there in my more general gameplay testing. Might have been down to Nvidia going with 8GB of memory, while AMD looks forward with a full-fat 16. Again, on paper, Nvidia's memory is faster, but not by a huge amount when it comes to the real world, and it just may be that more is better than faster here. Alright, Fortnite. Not a game I play or even want to play for benchmark reasons, so I actually found a custom map that plays itself. Hooray! And it's filled with sparks and fireworks and lighting effects and such to explicitly push performance for benchmarking. Running, of course, on Epic's own Unreal Engine, and recent recipient of a ray tracing upgrade. Without tracing rays at 4K maxed settings, and yes, I know that's not what the settings competitive players use. That's not the point. The point is finding the performance gap here because we're testing the cards, not the game. But interestingly, both old and new AMD cards beat the 3070 here, which is very, very interesting indeed. With ray tracing on, it's unplayable at 4K, by the way, in case you're curious. And at 1440p, well, clearly, the issue was not the cards. Very similar results, in fact, to 4K, except the ray tracing test was about twice the frame rate. Still unplayable, but twice the frame rate we were getting with 4K at least. I plucked out Horizon Zero Dawn next, running on Decima, a proprietary game engine made in-house by Guerrilla Games, and a unique game on this list because it's a port. It's not the only multi-platform game on my list, but all the other multi-platform games here were developed as multi-platform releases from the start. This was released as a console game, then later ported to PC. At 4K, it's a console plebeian 30 FPS on the 5700 XT. Its fresh new sibling in the 6800, though, doubles the frame rate, giving us another look at the immense generational performance leap RDNA 2 gives us. And the 3070 lags behind, just slightly, by 5 to 10 frames a second or so. But rather interestingly, at 1440p, the tables turn. Well, not turn, but shift slightly. Someone jammed a matchbook under one of the legs of Nvidia's side to level it out a bit. Here, the new cards are basically frame for frame. A little waver either way here or there, but in practical terms, in real-world gameplay, we can call it identical. And Godfall. This is the other Unreal Engine game I mentioned, already represented on this list by Outer Worlds, but engaged very differently in this game, of course. Also, Godfall is shiny and new and is advertised with ray tracing. Oh, except, rather annoyingly, not at launch on PC. Instead, it's promised some unknown time. Later, they say. In a patch. Sometime. That was all pretty annoying because some of the charts I was shown by AMD themselves had this game on their list of ray tracing comparison things. Obviously, they were using some sort of beta I don't have access to that in fact had ray tracing turned on, but yeah, didn't launch that way. Couldn't test it that way. Very, very frustrating. Like I said before, it's not uncommon for Unreal Engine 4 games to see Nvidia with a lead, but here, at 4K epic settings, as you can see, it's a much closer match. For all practical purposes, it's a push. Both cards wibble and wobble around that magic 60 FPS mark. A bit of a tweaking will see a nice solid lock, and I doubt you'll notice the difference in the high-paced, splashy, flashy gameplay this game provides. But this is a game where high frame rates do make a significant difference in how it feels to play. And that's where 1440p lives. Again, both cards are very closely matched, but I would give the edge to AMD here. I'm seeing higher numbers on that more often. You will of course want to use this with a 144Hz or better FreeSync monitor for the best possible experience to nuke the tearing and such, but I'm telling you right now, at these triple-digit numbers, on a high-frequency monitor, with FreeSync or whatnot, if you got this on PS5, you are missing out on how sweet this game feels at those triple-digit frame rates. It's lovely. Okay, so what about ray tracing? Frustratingly, with the Godfall developers' bait and switch and the stupid bug in Watch Dogs Legion, I didn't have the real-world tests I wanted to do when it came to ray tracing performance. So instead we fall back on canned benchmarks and a game with only partial ray tracing use. But it will at least tell us something comparative between the 6800 and 3700, and that's what we're all interested in, isn't it? But here is your obligatory reminder to make sure you have subscribed and build, so when those issues with Godfall and Watch Dogs Legions are ironed out, I will do some more proper in-game comparative tests for you between these two cards. But as for today, Bright Memory Infinite Ray Tracing Benchmark comes up first, a canned standalone benchmark made from the assets of the Bright Memory game. With 3 different levels of ray tracing compared to a completely off setting, we see something very important. NVIDIA's DLSS is a game changer, and AMD really need to hurry up and get their own version of this technology out into the world. I know the benchmark results you're looking at makes it look like AMD is using DLSS, but it can't because that's an NVIDIA thing. It's just that this particular benchmark hasn't been updated to reflect that properly. As you can see, AMD's results dump in a pretty linear fashion as we go up in settings, as you might expect for a test like this, while NVIDIA's side, not so dramatic because DLSS is kicking in and keeps us well above the 60 FPS target we usually shoot for. But that is just DLSS helping NVIDIA keep it set up. It's a cheat. It's a very clever technological, magical cheat, but it's a cheat, and isn't really representative of the difference in what the ray tracing accelerating hardware is capable of without this kind of clever resolution cheating. The only reason I left this test in at all is because it does demonstrate how important DLSS can be in being able to use ray tracing without compromising your settings. So, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, one of the original flagship games pushed heavily in the original launch of the RTX lineup. We're seeing this now without the help of DLSS, but also, this game really only uses ray tracing for the shadows. But it is a much more apples-to-apples situation, so we can see that while AMD's first-generation ray tracing accelerating hardware is, as we all expected, lagging behind NVIDIA's now second-generation workhorse. It's a lot closer than most people were predicting though, isn't it? In fact, in every test right up to Ultra, there's not a lot of difference in there, and the AMD card does stay healthily above 60 FPS, which is where, practically speaking, you'd cap this game off anyway. Then there's 3DMark's DirectX Ray Tracing Feature Test, a much more mechanical comparison, not being a game or even based on an existing game's assets and engine, but it does tell you the story that most were expecting. While the 3070 pulls over 30 FPS, AMD gets closer to 22. I doubt this will be truly representative of what frame rate differences we can expect in real games in the real world under real condition, but this canned benchmark does tell you something about the generational differences of the ray tracing acceleration hardware itself. So between these 3 examples I've shown you, we get a general idea of what we're expecting here. Again, like we expected, not as good as Team Green's, but actually doing better than most of us expected, so that's very encouraging. And once AMD get their DLSS equivalent out the door, things will get even more interesting. So, finally, AMD have their one-click automatic overclock function in their software, so let's give that a go. In my case, it locked in a 2329 MHz clock speed compared to the non-boost stock clock of 1815, so pretty significant already. Now, outside of just doing this for poops and giggles, in real-world terms, this is going to be most useful in trying to pull up those 4K ultra frame rates a bit, where we didn't quite hit 60. And sure enough, in Horizon Zero Dawn, while it didn't see a significant difference in average frame rate, it sure did melt away those low drops, those lag spikes. We went from 19 FPS at the absolute bottom end to just under 30. That's a huge difference in practical terms. And that of course means with the overclock, it'll be easier still to nail down a premium level 4K 60 FPS gaming experience here. The same rings true for Watch Dogs Legion, although this time slightly less dramatically, and it did pull up the max from 55 to 59. Perhaps not something most people will notice while playing the game, but psychologically it just feels better, doesn't it? 60 FPS? And finally, Godfall, whose own built-in benchmarking tool is almost comedically useless, by the way, growling at the developers for that. It only reports average FPS at the end of the run, nothing else. But it is at least repeatable, so I used it here for this test, and here I saw basically no difference. But all in all, a one-click overclock like this can and will come in very handy, like I said, for ironing out the lows and mids, making tweaking to get to 4K 60 settings easier still. In those games where we can't quite get there at just ultra or epic settings or whatever. You can of course go full manual overclock with this card for more drastic results, and from my early experiments with that, it seems like a very beefy overclocker. The take-home story overall here is, in headline form, AMD has caught up, and more often than not will slightly beat Team Green's 3070 in fact. But the tables turn again, where once AMD were competing mostly on price, not quite being able to match Nvidia tier for tier as far as performance goes, this time it's flipped. The standard pricing on an RTX 3070 is at $499, or either side thereof, depending on the specific model and particular brand, etc, etc, etc. It's always the way with Nvidia cards, lots of choices. While the 6800 is $579, which is, for those of you not especially good at math, fully 80 Biden bucks more. I can't tell you how good it is not to say Trump bucks anymore. Oh no, political. So while it really can and will sometimes outperform the 3070 in a few games by a noticeable amount, I'm not convinced that it's 80 smackers worth of edge. Not when people are comparing them side by side, dollar for dollar, frame rate for frame rate. All that said, I have no doubt it will be popular. And it's superb. It really is superb on its own merits. And it's wonderful there's finally an AMD piece of hardware that truly goes toe-to-toe with Nvidia's most popular level of card. The long and the short of their 6800 is this. It delivers on what AMD promised it would. As they claimed, it's a very fine 4K gaming card, and an absolute monster at 1440p. If you are looking at 4K, you're probably going to have to forego the ray tracing because the performance hit on that at 4K is probably going to be too much a lot of the time. But if you want to go 1440p, chances are you'll be able to turn ray tracing on and keep all your highest settings most of the time without much bother at all. So there you go. That's my recommendation. That's my demonstration to you. Let me know what you think in the down below. How excited are you? What do you think about the price per performance comparison with the 3070? Which way are you going to go? Team red, team green? Is performance or is price the only metric you're measuring up against? Do you have a brand loyalty? I'm sure I don't even need to ask. Those of you with brand loyalties are already screaming about it in the down below area because that's what fanboys do, don't they? Thank you ever so much for watching. I am Blunty. Hopefully this has been useful, informative, or interesting. And thank you, as always, to the wonderful patrons, kind patrons, glorious patrons who go above and beyond to help support this channel. Thank you very much. I am Blunty. I think I said that already. Thanks for watching. Probably said that already. I will catch you next time. I really do hope that's true.